Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan and welcome to the latest episode of our entertainment show. And as you know, each month we run a special call to feature called True Life Stories, where we look at true life stories of extraordinary individuals all across the world that have faced, dare I say, harrowing situations or a remarkable turn of events that have really left their mark in terms of their life and really has made them become known throughout their own small place or small hemisphere in terms of a world life effect. And this week we're going to talk about something that is sort of dare I say, it's always been an intrigue for people in terms of the Shackleton days, looking back and sort of hearing about the Southern Pole, Antarctica, and all its mysterious intrigues. And it's probably the continent that is least known about in terms of what it entails. Not many people have, dare I say, stepped foot on the soils and the shoreline of Antarctica, and not people have come back to tell some great sort of stories. But we're delighted this evening to be joined by a geologist, just sort of such, in terms of a writer, a freelance journalist writer from California, who had, dare I say, experienced Antarctica in terms of discovering there about looking into lakes that running underneath the ice in terms of discovery. He spent a while there in Antarctica, but during his stay he had a harrowing experience where, dare I say, at times it looked like he mightn't be coming back from Antarctica, but he's back to tell us about his story today and the turmoil that led up to that, and obviously his safe arrival, the one and only Douglas Fox. Douglas, a pleasure to join us there today. And do you have, dare I say, first of all, Douglas, do you have happy memories of Antarctica, or is it dear with some sort of scareful memories? Do you have the odd occasion nightmare as well?
It's all happy memories. And I do have, you go down there and you have dreams about it for the rest of your life. This is kind of a well-known thing, and they're good dreams.
They're sort of good dreams. And
Yeah.
Douglas, dare I say, obviously going to Antarctica for you, it was probably a trip of a lifetime in terms of your profession, in terms of what you wanted to discover. And was it, dare I say, was it not maybe months, was it years in the making? Was this something that you invested an awful lot of your resources, your time, your money into this sort of project? And when it did come to fruition, was it all sort of excitement, dare I say?
So I've been half a dozen times now, and the first time I did go in 2007, I thought it would be once in a lifetime, and then I was there again less than a year later. But there are things that the trips involve years of planning ahead of time, but it's often I sort of get in with scientific expeditions that are going there already, so I sort of get in with their operation and kind of it's forming relationships, and then being ready to go at the right time.
And Douglas, do you have to prepare yourself in terms of physique, in terms of sort of training, in terms of nutrition, in terms of hydration, in terms of preparing yourself for Antarctica and visiting a continent where sometimes the temperatures, dare I say, it could be, dare I say, -10, -15, even higher, lower than that, in terms of that, in terms of insulation, in terms of warmth, in terms of basic survival needs?
I think I wouldn't say that I do so much specifically because of it, but it's definitely, when you're out in the field, it's relentless. And the temperatures in the summertime, I mean, it's 24-hour daylight, and you're out in a field camp, and you're sleeping with light streaming in through your tent. You wake up and you think it's morning time and it's light, but oh no, I've only been asleep for 30 minutes. No, it's kind of relentless in terms of just the exercise, and just like a lot of the time the temperatures aren't that low, but you have nowhere warm to go necessarily. And so a lot of the time, if you're out like digging snow pits and putting in instrumentation, that's a lot of exercise. You stay warm, but sometimes you're in a tent during the day doing other work, and you have to go out and shovel snow to keep warm, to kind of warm your body up. It's the most reliable way of doing it.
And dare I say, in terms of weather conditions, in terms of Antarctica, in terms of blizzards, in terms of snowstorms, in terms of changes in temperature. Can that change at the drop of the hat? Is there any sort of preparation that involved? Can you know, dare I say, when the weather is going to take a turn for the worse?
We tend to have some knowledge of that, but I mean, it's funny. I mean, you can be out on the when you're say 84 degrees south of the equator, and you're I mean, maybe 350 miles from the South Pole. It's just big flat white. It's flat white in every direction. The sun just does circles around you all day. It never goes down, and everything looks the same. And it can be just brilliant sun. You're actually putting sunscreen up your nostrils so you don't get burnt because it's reflecting up and hitting you from unusual directions. But I really, the storms that we tend to get are with wind just kind of blowing relentlessly in one direction, and those are really some good memories, actually, believe it or not. You build, those are coming, and you take saws and shovels, and you cut out snow blocks, and you build snow block walls around your tents to kind of keep them from getting kind of crushed by the wind. You put out flags in order to see, so that you can navigate around camp, because you may not be able to see more than a few meters ahead of you. And you just kind of hunker down and sort of sort of just know that you're not going to get much else done during that time. I think it's really distracting, when you're trying to sleep and it's sort of like just extremely loud, just flapping. The wind is just, your tent is just flapping relentlessly in the wind, and it's very loud. But you usually you're working hard enough during a storm that you get used to it. I mean, you get tired and you fall asleep anyway, and there's always a lot of work to do. This time, the last time I was there at Thwaites Ice Shelf in 2019, 2020, we had a storm come through. It was probably about 40 knot winds, which is not as bad as it could have gotten. And I mean, we were up, I had a snow wall about 7 feet tall around my tent. And it was because of various reasons, it was probably about a meter wide, a meter thick. And it didn't necessarily have to be that thick, but it was dealing with the oddities of the wind. And what the wind does, it'll pile up snow and pile it on top of your tent, and your tent can be crushed. These are little small tents, 1-person tents. So there's a lot of work to be done during a storm, but they're wonderful memories, actually. You feel like you're alive in nature, and at least that level of storm, 40 knot winds, it's not life threatening. It's just, it's a lot of work.
And Douglas, in terms of navigation, in terms of, you mentioned there about storms and blizzards, and in terms of, obviously you had fellow people with you there as well, but if you ever came, let's I say, lost, is it so easy, dare I say, to lose a person that might be a meter or so in front of you?
I've not seen it that bad. I mean, there are, I think, people who describe being in places where, I don't know, maybe you can see your hand in front of your face, but maybe a short distance away, maybe 5-10 meters, it would be difficult. I'd say my first season there, we had a storm. We had very low visibility. And it's funny because you're going from flag to flag, and the flags are maybe 5 meters apart. Maybe no, they're not 10 meters. They're 5 meters apart. And you can just barely make out. You can make out the next one in front of you when you're going from your tent to, say, the one where everybody's doing, cooking and things like that. You can just make it out. The weird thing is, at this time, you can look up to the sky. You turn your head and look up, and you see blue. And that's the strangest thing, because you're in a blizzard, but there's no snow actually coming down. And it's because we got these katabatic winds sliding down off the polar plateau, these masses of air, and it just accelerates as it slides downhill. And it starts, and you're walking on the surface of the ice sheet is a hard packed snow surface, but it's like walking on styrofoam. But then over time, over a day or two, the wind just blasts the hell out of it until it starts just ripping the snow off. And so what you're doing, you're walking, the blizzard that you're walking through is just snow that got picked up by the wind, maybe 50 kilometers upwind of you. And it's just tearing it up and blowing it through. So it's kind of weird like that. A lot of the storms do not actually involve. I've been in storms when I was stranded on an island when our helicopter was forced to land. I've been in storms where there was new snow coming down, but a lot of the time, low visibility, and the only direction you can see is up.
Okay. And Robert, maybe you can talk us through that day. Anyone that's seen that sort of article, it's a fascinating read
Yeah.
in terms of stranded in Antarctica. Can you tell us the events leading up to that point, that sort of day when you found out, dare I say, that your mode of transport wasn't going to be there for you?
Yeah. So this was in 2010. It was February 8th, 2010, and I was down on the Antarctic Peninsula, which is it's a peninsula of land that kind of sticks up toward the bottom of South America. It's the northernmost part of the continent. People often call it the banana belt of Antarctica because it's the wettest, warmest place, but it's not really that warm actually. But we were down there on an icebreaker, a ship that kind of plows its way through the ice, and we were trying to get down to the Larsen B ice shelf, an area where a huge swath of ice, many times the size of New York City, had disintegrated in a period of days. We were trying to get down there with some researchers, and anyway, I was off ship for one day with a geologist, with Greg Balco, a geologist, and we were visiting Sjogren Glacier, which is one of the glaciers that flows off. And it was a normal day. We were there walking around alongside the glacier all day long, and then it was time to go home, and we called the helicopter to take us back to the ship. And the helicopter arrived, we're flying, and it's kind of, it's cloudy, it's overcast, there's snow coming down, and there's white all around us. And the white is just closing in more and more and more around the helicopter. Pretty soon, you could tell that Barry, the pilot, was flying lower and lower over the sea ice. You're flying over just the frozen surface of the ocean. And that's the only texture. It's the only thing you have in sight that is not just plain white. And it starts to become a very dangerous situation, that they're not doing instrumented travel because the maps are not good enough. There are mountains in the wrong places on the maps. And so they have to fly visual. And at some point, he doesn't even have enough cues to keep the helicopter, level, or he was getting toward that. And there was one last thing that we passed that was not white. And that was a little spit of land, of unglaciated land off the bottom part of James Ross Island. And we landed on that. It was just kind of dark rock, and we landed there. We thought, okay, we're going to be here for 15 minutes. That's what he said. We radioed the ship. We're going to be here for 15 minutes, just waiting for the weather to improve. And instead, it turned into a few nights that we were there. I was on the ship on that field season. I was on the ship for 57 days, and the 3 nights and 4 days that we were there off stranded on the island was actually, I think, the best parts too, actually. But you get there, you realize you're not leaving, and the helicopter is kind of becoming draped in icicles, and at that point it's unflyable. You can't just turn it on and flip a switch, and you have to make sure it's still going to work, and that needs mechanics and everything. It needs a really good look over by people who do that. So, you just, okay, it's time to get off the tents. We weren't planning on being here. We don't have a lot of food with us, but it's time to get off the tents. And we're all doing things that we've been trained how to do. And it was getting out the tents, building the snow block walls around, and just killing time.
And in terms of the food element, in terms of rationing, you mentioned there about coming back on a helicopter, and hopefully you're going back to the ship in your eyes. So obviously, in terms of, you probably didn't have sort of much food on you, no. Dare I say, in terms of that. So obviously, with the human beings, so sort of 3 of you, dare I say, and you don't know, you knew it was 4 to 5. You could have been longer. You didn't obviously know at that time when you might be. So what was the whole sort of thinking? Did you have to think on the spot in terms of food, in terms of water, in terms of the general sort of essence, in terms of human survival?
Yeah, I mean, we had some freeze-dried meals. We were going on about 1 meal per day during the time we were there. We were there 3 nights, but we had a small amount of chocolate. I think I ate 3 squares of chocolate the second morning there. But by the third morning, we were done with all of our meals. And it takes a long time to starve to death. We weren't going to starve to death, but my knowledge of weather on that part of the continent is such that I was afraid we were going to be there for a week or 10 days, and it was going to get very uncomfortable. I will say that even just being there, we could be inside the tent, we could be in the helicopter. The helicopter is it's like being inside a greenhouse. There's no insulation. It was cold in the helicopter. It was very cold. It was not a nice place to be. So we were getting hungrier and dopier, I feel like, by the hour. Just kind of hungrier and dumber. It wasn't bad. And at the same time, you're just kind of going for walks, to warm up. It was a wet storm. It was probably, are we talking Celsius? Is that how? Yeah, if we're talking Celsius, it was probably between 0 and -4 maybe. It wasn't that cold, but it's blowing snow, and it gets into every little pocket of your clothing, and it melts, and then it turns to ice, then it melts again, and you can really easily end up soaked. And it was just constant work to stay dry, because if you get wet, you're gonna be really cold, and that starts to be a safety threat. But it was getting outside and just walking around just to keep warm a lot of the time, because again, you can be in the tent, but the tent itself is not creating any heat. We were walking around, and one day we found a very old wooden crate, and in this crate was these rusted cans. One of them said leche condensado. It was Spanish for condensed milk. And we don't know. I think this food was probably decades old, probably by some Argentine expedition. We have no idea how old it was, but I was tempted to think, well, we could get into that food and eat that too. But the next thing you know, you're sick, you have diarrhea, you're vomiting, and you still don't have any food. So it didn't seem like a good gamble to take it.
And Douglas, in terms of, you mentioned there walking, and obviously you're fairly good with terms of the geology in terms of Antarctica, in terms of was there any sort of, dare I say, sort of treacherous walking conditions? We know about crevices, we know about ice sort of breaking, in terms of where you sort of landed, in terms of, because you weren't planning to land where you sort of learned. So was it, dare I say, was it uncharted sort of terrain in terms of not having maps or stuff at your disposal, in terms of, dare I say, what you could be walking on or what you could be walking up against?
It was actually for areas that we could have been forced to land involuntarily, it was actually a pretty good place. And we were walking mostly, it was gravel, it was, there were fossils in some of the rocks there, but it wasn't bad. If you look at the beach was just sea ice, and it was just hundreds and thousands it wasn't nice, pretty flat sea ice like in a cartoon you go ice skating off on. It was just hundreds or thousands of pieces of ice, maybe the size of bed mattresses, that were just broken up and kind of tilted in all these different ways. And if you had actually tried to walk out on that, it would have been very dangerous. We could have, in theory, walked all the way to the ship. Maybe it was 10, 20 kilometers away. We could have walked all the way to the ship in theory, but getting past all that, these blocks of ice can tip. And if they tip, you are likely to go in the water. And not only, the water is about the freezing point of human flesh, because it's salt water, it's below 0 centigrade. It's probably around -1 or -1.5, -2 degrees Celsius. So it's bad. And if the ice shifts and you go in, it probably shifts back and you're sealed in under the big block of ice. So we couldn't go there. And on the other hand, there were times when the wind would calm down. The visibility was still very bad, but the wind would calm down, and you could hear this low growl way far away. And we recognized that as the sound of the icebreaker, the Nathaniel B. Palmer. And you could hear it backing and ramming, trying to get through the ice, trying to get to us, which was a little weird, because it's a scientific expedition, and you hope that they're carrying on their work, just using the time that they're down there. But instead, they had all science shut down and were just trying to get to us. But the ice was anywhere. In some places, it was in excess of 2 meters thick, that ice. And so it was the maximum of what it could back and ram, and they didn't even get near to us.
And in terms of Antarctica, we know it's one of the hardest places in terms of survival, and there's just the three of you. Dare I say, I'm not too familiar about in terms of the animals that sort of live in Antarctica, but I imagine that there is one or two sort of predators. I don't know if polar bears are North America
Not there.
or not there. You lucky
Yeah.
so, but in terms of, so was there any sort of, dare I say, sort of animals sort of threat to you that you had to worry about, or was it just the conditions?
I think just the conditions there. Yeah, there is no, I think the thing you worry about there for animals in that area is leopard seals.
Okay.
And they're like, it's like not quite elephant size. I don't know, maybe the size of a very big bull, but carnivorous, and have killed people, certainly. And I've certainly, on other parts of that cruise, we would be out on a little Zodiac, boat, motoring through the bay. This is a place where there wasn't sea ice, but there were pieces of ice floating around, and you'd see a big leopard seal with a scarred up, blunt nose, snout looking at you. And it would just, you could just see this thing looking at you and sort of like thinking, hello, lunch. But as long as we're not in the water, it's fine. As soon as you're in the water, you could be taken. Yeah. But it wasn't. Yeah, there's no land animals that are going to threaten a human there.
Okay.
Yeah, it was really just, honestly, just a matter of cold and staying dry, and honestly not wandering too far from where we were camped, because it seemed like a small area. Maybe it felt like the area where we landed really felt like maybe 2 or 3 soccer pitches. But I would go walking and walking and walking. There was a place where there was a kind of a cliff facing us, a cliff between us and the rest of the island, and you could see it. There was a glacier flowing through, and the glacier would have been very dangerous to climb onto. That was full of cracks, crevasses, where you could slide in and get cracked, and stuck in a crack that you'd never get pulled out of. But you'd go walking and you'd realize, wow, this area is actually much bigger than we think it is, because there's no trees, there's nothing to make you realize, there's nothing for size scale. I think that the insecure thing I wanted to explore, but you'd always be thinking, looking back, can I see camp from here? And if something happens in the next 3 minutes, if the weather changes, which it could change, am I going to be able to find my way back? That was the big thing. And it was dark rock, but everything was coated in a couple feet of snow by the end of our being there.
And Douglas, in terms of sort of clothing, I imagine you had sort of thermal sort of clothing on, but I suppose our listeners and our viewers they can precipitate the cold, but obviously you're in that same sort of clothing for 3 or 4 days in terms of trying to keep it warm. There's no sort of change of clothing, but I imagine that, dare I say, if you took off your gloves for 30 seconds, a minute, the effects they could have on the sort of fingers in terms of frostbite, in terms of that. I know you have to keep blood circulation going, but there's always that sort of risk that we hear the sort of horrendous stories of frostbite and the effects that it can have.
That wasn't too bad. Like I said, this was a warm storm, which in some ways made the danger of getting wet, and then the kind of the creeping, kind of inexorable issue of hypothermia from getting wet, which can certainly be dangerous. But and the wind was constantly blowing, but it wasn't that cold. Gloves were definitely on. I'd say not even gloves, mittens. Mittens were on the whole time. But it was funny. It was a storm the entire time. The wind was blowing. And the storms that pass through this part of Antarctica, they're like little miniature hurricanes. They could do circles around the entire continent, and you can see them on maps. They really are these spinning things like hurricanes. And yeah, it's just loud and unpleasant when you're outside. But the funny thing is, you go in the tent and you can be insulated from that. So the third morning when I woke up, I thought, oh wow, I don't hear anything. I think it's probably a nice day out there. Like they're gonna come get us. And I unzipped the tent and there was a wall of snow. I mean, a wall of snow, not the wall that I built, but just snow, because the space in between our snow wall and the tent had been completely filled in with drifting snow. And so you're having to shovel your way out, kind of tunnel your way out, but not by putting snow into the tent, because your sleeping stuff is in there. And I tunneled my way out and finally got my way out and stuck my head out. And it was blowing just like it had been the entire time. But our tent was so sealed in, it was like being sealed in with styrofoam with the wall around it, and then everything filled in with snow all around the tent. We had no idea how loud it actually was out there. But it was so quiet inside the tent.
Yeah. And Douglas, in terms of that sort of experience, I know you're a writer and you were sort of about writing about an experience in diary. When you were sort of trapped at that experience, did you sort of take notes in terms of your sort of experience, or did the worry or fear factor kick in that, right, I'll take concepts, or I'll take notes about this once I get sort of rescued, in terms of, were you thinking, right, this is an experience that I may never experience again? So in terms of, was that going through your head as a sort of a journalist there as such, to try and recount in terms of what was going through today, and maybe as a pastime, as a hobby, to keep the mind sane? Was it a thing where, and how were you able to sort of keep track of what time was, or was it just a case of when you sort of felt that there was something that you wanted to jot into the diary, that you jotted in?
Yeah, I mean, I came back from that trip with about 1,100 pages of handwritten notebook.
Wow.
Maybe 70 hours of recorded conversations, and I can't even think how many videos, and maybe 10,000 photos from that entire trip, the 57-day trip. But yeah, it was funny. I mean, I kind of knew this was amazing to be out here, to be off the ship, because I don't know, when you're on a ship for 2 months, you just kind of get stir crazy. So just being off it, we felt lucky. But the funny thing is when I go back to my photos and videos of those 3 nights when we were off the ship, I don't actually have and when I go back to the handwritten notes, I don't have all that much. And I think it was because the level, it didn't seem extreme at the time to us, but I think the level of just dopiness and being a little hungry, a little bit cold, a little bit sort of, you're hungry, and so you're not really thinking all that clearly, um, I think I just didn't take as nearly as many as I might have during that time. I mean, it was amazing. I remember little details like it's all white. The sky is white. The sea ice on this edge of the island going off in the distance is white. And then there are these three little black things that come in, that sail into sight. And I realized they're these birds called skuas. And they come in, they land. I'm standing there at the beach, and they land. And it's like, what are these things doing here? It's swirling, blowing snow. We can't even see that far. I don't know how they know where they are. And I saw what they were coming after. They were coming after this little bit of torn aluminum foil from an aluminum foil blanket that the pilot Barry had tried to wrap around the rotor of the helicopter. It had gotten shredded by the wind, but these things that are just perfectly at home in that place came just to see what that was. Who knows how
Nesting,
far
I'd
they?
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, they is it food? Yeah, and I've seen one of these birds maybe 400 miles from the South Pole, 500 400 miles, maybe I don't know, 700 kilometers from the South Pole, 800 kilometers from the nearest ocean. I've seen them that far inland before, just come flying around. I have no idea what they're doing up there, and they see your camp and they land and kind of walk around to see if there's anything to eat.
Dare
So
I say they're a type of vulture-esque in terms of
yes,
sort of-
like part vulture, part seagull, meaner than either one.
yeah.
Yes.
And Douglas, can you tell us about your sort of the day you were sort of rescued in terms of when that all came about? And obviously you weren't unaware of this happening. When did sort of signs come about on that day that something could be happening? They might have located where you were in terms of that, and in terms of the events. And dare I say, when you did get back to ship, was the conscious to sort of relate to family, relate to people at home that you're okay?
So yeah, so I did wonder what people, there were people expecting messages from me at various times, and I wondered what they were thinking since they weren't hearing from me. But so the ship knew where we were, but because we were in contact with them via radio, but they couldn't get to us. I mean, they were, even at one point we were told, oh, we were told on the radio, Washington is aware of your situation, like NSF in Washington. Like, wow, thanks. We're eating our last chocolate squares, but thanks, that's good to know. But they made a number of attempts to get to us with the helicopter. There were two helicopters in that area on the ship, one of which was sitting at our camp with icicles all over, but they had another one for this very reason, in case something like this happened. And there were multiple attempts to get to us, and we'd be, okay, they're gonna come, and then like kind of, well, they didn't make, you could just tell, like, you didn't hear the helicopter, they launched and they decided they weren't good, they couldn't make it. So this had happened a number of times, and on that third morning, actually the third afternoon, really, had been there for about 4 days total by that point. I had finally, all the attempts that day had failed, maybe a couple of them. And I had finally, like, I got to warm up. I was walking way up as far as I had been from camp the entire time. And I started to hear like a, boop, 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 kind of the beating of rotors in the air. Like, uh-oh, is that a helicopter? They didn't tell us they were coming. And I thought, oh no. And I just remember running as fast as I could back to where, back to where our stranded helo was, back to our tents. And sure enough, out of some little tiny hole in the clouds, this helicopter appears and lands. And, it was just, we had been there just like we were going to be there forever, just kind of waiting, and time seems hardly to pass. And suddenly we're just throwing bags in, just throwing everything in the helicopter. And because, if you wait, and if it takes you an extra minute to get that thing loaded up, the weather may change, and that helo may be stranded as well. And there's only 2 helicopters on that ship.
Okay.
Yeah, like there's no other helicopter for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. So like that's our only ride out. And so yeah, I just remember just throwing everything in, and just suddenly we're up, and we're up, and we're flying. And I remember just looking around thinking, like, I don't see how this guy can even see anything. Like, I can barely see anything. And he squeezed us through some little tiny hole. And pretty soon we were landing down on the ship. And it was exciting to be back. I ate like at least 2 dinners that night. They kept the galley open late for us. It was exciting to be back. Yeah, we just ate a lot of food. I think that's
And
what
I
we meant.
suppose, Douglas, you mentioned that about the sort of when the plane touched down, in terms of you were very much, dare I say, in military sort of mode. There was no high fives, there was no sort of celebrating that you were sort of being rescued. It was very much we need to ASAP get on this plane quick and get back to the ship before the weather changes, or we might be getting back to the ship, in terms of. So dare I say, there was no sort of thought process, no thoughts came into your mind that you were okay, that you were safe when the helicopter arrived down, that you only presumed you were safe when you touched down back on that ship again, I imagine?
I think so. Yeah, it wasn't high fives. It was like, I didn't want to be the reason that, there were 3 of us, and so far all of us had been strong links, Barry, the pilot, and Greg, the geologist, and I. So I didn't want to be the reason that we got left behind. That's why I was running. And yeah, I mean, we got in the helicopter and then we took off, and I'm looking around and I'm just thinking, I don't remember what it looked like, but I just remember thinking, wow, this doesn't look any better than what we landed in, than what we were forced to land in the other day. And I, you know, I was nervous. I was nervous on the flight back, and I think he was flying low, and you could see the texture of the sea ice, so that was sort of the safety line. The sea ice has these pressure ridges, and just from all the different pieces that have been driven together by the wind and kind of smashed together, so you could see that below. And I didn't really think anything bad was going to happen, but I was nervous. Yeah, yeah, and there was just very little visibility. But then you see the ship. The ship is kind of an orange, and you see that it's like, okay, that we're I know we're going to land now. Now that I see the ship, but yeah,
And
I didn't feel convinced until we saw the ship.
And Douglas, when you land in the ship, and obviously that you got some bit of food into you, and you got hydrated, and you got a bit of the change of sort of clothing. When you made contact with family members at home and loved ones, were they sort of aware the scenario that happened to you? Were they aware that you were sort of missing? Had they reached out to people on the ship in the meantime, wondering, well, why has Douglas hasn't made contact? He was supposed to make contact, and were they informed of what happened, or were they kept in the dark?
They didn't. I wasn't in such daily contact with people. I think, yeah, I think my partner at the time, I think she was starting to wonder why she hadn't heard from me for so long, but and had maybe started emailing other people. I mean, the email that we have is satellite email. It's basically like texting on your phone, but without sending photos and that sort of thing. So we didn't have great communication. So, but I sort of definitely reached out to some people and let them know that, yeah, that I was okay. But it was just sort of, yeah, it was just good to be back and eating.
And Douglas, when you arrived back on the ship, were the tensions after such a scenario, such an event happened to you? Did you think to yourself, right, I want to get back home, get back to normal sort of society, and dare I say, park the Antarctica experience for another time to come back again? Or did you stay for much longer after that experience had happened to you?
So I mean, we were on a ship, and so that ship, had left on, I think, about January 3rd, 2010. It had left port in Punta Arenas, Chile, and we were going to be on it until it came back. There was no way to leave early. And yeah, I mean, I was just looking forward to, yeah, I was, when we got back that evening, I remember staying up really late because I don't know why, it was just exciting to be back. And also the ship itself was covered in snow. The deck was entirely covered in snow and icicles. And it was just looking around, just walking around, seeing it, because it did not look like that when we left it. I think the one thing that I was thinking forward to at that moment was, to get to Antarctica from South America on a ship, you have to cross the Drake Passage, and that is sort of the circumpolar current is this is the one place in the world where the wind can drive waves all the way around the world without ever anything in the way to slow them to break the waves. And so it gets the storms there in the Drake Passage can be pretty vicious. And on the way down, we had a storm where we had 35, 45 foot waves. I mean, it was brutal. And you're on the ship and you've hardly ever been on a ship anywhere, and you're just sort of seeing this coming at you, and it's really, I won't say it was scary, but it was, you're like, okay, I'm going to trust that the people I'm on the ship with know what they're doing, the crew, and they did. But it was also just very, it is seasick inducing. It's brutal.
I
But the
imagine
way
so.
back was hardly anything. We had a smooth ride back. So.
And Douglas, in terms of, dare I say, you went out for excursion that day in terms of doing some geology work in terms of, and obviously the events unfolded. dare I say, when you came back to the ship after that harrowing sort of experience, did any sort of maybe anxiety sort of kick in or something like that, that maybe, right, if I have to go out in 2 or 3 days time, obviously there's a helicopter that's not working, that something similar could happen? That ever sort of taught your frame of mind, or were you able to push up back that sort of experience? Were you able to take it out of your head straight away?
I wasn't so worried about that. I think I'll tell you a couple of things. One is that when you're getting on the helicopter, these are not big helicopters, and so every pound of something that you bring on, every kilogram that you bring on it is less distance that it can fly, and so you're trying to keep your weights down. And so I almost, when I had my bag and everything ready to go, everything has to be pre-weighed. I didn't have that many, boring extra things like socks, like multiple extra socks. I did not have much at first. And at the last minute before that trip, I added a few extra pairs of socks. I know it sounds small, but I would have been really hurting if I hadn't added that. And after that, I was sort of vindicated. Like I'm never traveling light on the helicopter again. I mean, I think the other thing is whenever you're on a helicopter in that environment, before we went on that cruise, we had spent a week-long meeting in DC getting ready for this cruise. And one aspect of that was helicopter dunk training. And this is just the helicopters flying above water and basically the training that if the helicopter goes down, they can glide like a little Samara seed, like a pinwheel, and kind of come down. If they lose power on the engine, they can come down and land on land. Maybe hard, but at least they land. But if it's water, they're going to come down, and the first thing that's going to happen, they're going to go upside down, and you're going underwater. And it's very cold water. And when we had to do training, where we're just, in a little mini helicopter like container strapped in, and they throw you in the water right side up, upside down, on your side, all these things, and then you sort of, maybe without seeing, have to undo all the harnesses and everything and get yourself out. And I think just the process of doing that, it's kind of a reality check. It's knowing that this is really unlikely, but there are things that happen. You can get really strong sudden winds coming down some of these glacial fjords that can hit a helicopter really hard. And so I think that's always in the back of your mind, but at the end of the day, we didn't really have it happen, fortunately. That would have been bad.
And Douglas Fox, in terms of this experience and this sort of life's experience, before we sort of let you go, the sort of final sort of last for one or two questions, are you, dare I say, obviously no one likes unforeseen events happening to them in terms of their sort of life, but in terms of a life experience, do you think that a life experience happening to you has made you a stronger, more hard-willed, determined individual? In some cases, are you glad that sort of happened to you, or otherwise, no, I wouldn't like to go through that again?
I think of it like this, anytime you go there, there are things that can happen. Like adventure will find you, and you don't hope for adventure. You don't hope for it. You hope to go and have a simple trip and everything works according the way it's supposed to. But adventure, you don't hope for adventure because it will find you often enough. And I've stepped into the wrong spot without realizing it when I was out, 350 miles from the South Pole, and felt my boot sinking, and finally pulled my boot up and turned around and looked down and realized my boot print had no bottom because I had stepped on the very thin crust of it covering a crevasse, and just see those cold walls of ice going down below, and thinking like, wow, I could have almost been in that thing. That was scary. And you wake up, multiple times, over the next month or so, thinking, just you're suddenly, falling asleep, and suddenly you're awake and you're thinking about this. So I think, you don't hope for exciting things to happen. They happen often enough. But I'm thankful for these experiences, and there was a little concern about what if they don't find us, and not find us, but what if it takes them a week and a half to get us, when we were on that island, and we're going to get dopier and dopier and dopier, and like, oh, I wonder if this is what the British guys felt like, the Scots and the Shackletons. But and even just when I stepped on the top of that crevasse and got to look down into it for 1 second, no one else has ever looked into that crack. I got to, and that was an amazing moment. I'm glad I didn't end up inside it. They're precious, amazing moments, and I don't go there wishing for adventure. It just finds.
And Douglas Fox, I know you're sort of keen in terms of geologists, and is your lifetime work in terms of that sort of journalism aspect of it. Dare I say, is Antarctica still a place that is dear to your heart? Is future visits to the unknown continent of the world still in the horizon for you? Is it a place that you feel yourself going back to again and again?
I think it could happen. I don't have any, for the first time in a long time, I don't have any trips planned. I've done 6 trips there, and the last one, we've talked about exciting, things being stranded and whatnot. But, at the end of the day, the last time I was there, this is when I went to Thwaites Ice Shelf in 2019-2020 field season. And I was there for literally 3 months. And I think it was just hard on the kids. So I right now, I'm not currently going back anytime soon, but I think that at the right time, I would definitely go back again, because I love it. Yeah, I love it. You have dreams, you have funny dreams, you have dreams, you come out of your tent and you're on the ice sheet, and there's flat white going off in every direction, and there's trees and it's weird things where these dreams that mix that place together with things from your home, and it's just strangest thing, but they're very strong, emotionally kind of potent dreams. And I love it. I love exploring. I love even the process of being in a tent and in a storm and having to get up and build your snow wall. It's tiring, you're exhausted by the end, but it's some of the best stuff that life has to offer.
On that note, Douglas Fox, thanks for joining us today to share your story in our True Life Story section. Stranded in Antarctica. If you haven't seen it already, read the article, do look it up. Do check up Douglas Fox online. Do check up all his work in terms of his website, any sort of work that he has published in terms of Antarctica, in terms of geology, or if you just want to hear about his survival story. That includes our episode of True Life Stories today. From me, Jim Conlan, thanking you, Douglas Fox. Stay safe, take care, and enjoy the warmth, I say, of California in terms of the West Coast of America. I assume you dare I say you treasure a warm fire these days, Douglas.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you,
Have
Douglas.
a good evening.
Thank you for sharing your story. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.